Broadcasting the information the mainstream media won't touch. This is The Richie Allen Show in association with DavidIke.com.
Our first guest is an academic, a scientist, and the publisher and co-owner of Earth Pulse Press. He co-authored the excellent book, Angels Don't Play This Harp, and I spoke to him about this many years ago. That's how, in fact, I came across him, was reading that particular book. Now, his latest book is Controlling the Human Mind. His book's available even at all good online bookstores, but they can also be purchased at his website, which is earthpulse.com. Once again, earthpulse.com. Let's welcome back to the programme. It's been a long time. Thrilled to say hi again to my old mate, Dr. Nick Begich. Nick, welcome back. How are you?
I'm doing well, and it's so good to be back with you again. And as always, it's a pleasure to be on the air.
Well, thanks, Nick. It's been a while. I remember the first time we spoke was back in the late noughties, back in 2008, and we were talking about HARP and this technology, and it's been a lot of things have happened in the years since we first began speaking. Delighted you're on the programme. We've got you till just before the top of the hour. Loads and loads of questions were tweeted to us by our listeners today. Oh, Richie, you must put this to Nick and that to Nick. So I'm going to be fair to everybody. I'm going to keep it reasonably general, but there are a few things happening, of course, politically that I want to get your opinion on. Nick, I was thinking today, programs like mine, we don't spend as much time anymore these days talking about HARP. Now, you know, not including present company, you, of course, but we don't. What's going on with HARP, Nick? It seems to have disappeared from the consciousness of programs like ours. And yet I have the feeling it's still hugely important. What's happening?
Well, it's still an ongoing program, and currently it's been transferred, at least the facility itself, over to the University of Alaska Geophysical Institute up in Fairbanks. And the intention is to continue to operate it as a contractor for the various government agencies that have utilized it. But this is not the only facility. It is certainly the most versatile, but there are a number of ionospheric heaters, which is what these are referred to, scattered about the planet, including in Europe, Canada, and Russia. The thing I would say is the work continues in terms of what the observations were. And, you know, a lot of these things were straight up military applications, which we've discussed over the years. And many of those were proven up. Some of the more esoteric uses, weather control, the effect on human mental processes, these things are still a great concern to me. However, I would say there are many ways to affect human mental processes beyond HARP. And I think there's probably much more practical, much more directed systems that can manipulate human behavior, which to me actually is one of the most important issues that I've covered over the last 20 years.
Brilliant. And I want to talk about these ways that we can be manipulated, our thought processes can be manipulated. I want to talk about those specifically tonight. And thanks for bringing it up, Nick, and thanks again for coming on. Before we do that, though, just to finish for now with HARP, I remember you speaking to me a couple of years ago very eloquently about somebody called, and I had to rack my brains, I think it was J.F. Gordon MacDonald, am I right in saying that, about how you could electronically stroke the ionosphere to bring about an emotional response in a large body of people? Do you want to just give us a quick couple of words on that?
Right. What I was saying was that essentially you could in fact manipulate the ionosphere. And J.F. Gordon MacDonald was a geophysicist at UCLA, and he was also a science advisor to Lyndon Johnson. And what he said is, if you could ever figure out how to electronically stroke the ionosphere in just the right way, you could return a signal to the Earth that would affect the behavior of all of those in contact with that signal. And so when you think about HARP as a device that could actually do this, that's where it actually caught my attention. And J.F. Gordon MacDonald spoke about this, as did Persinger at Laurentian University up in Canada, talking about ways to manipulate just simple signals that would create a sense of, say, anxiety or discomfort in a population, a larger, huge geographic area, as an example.
And that's, Nick, that's the key here, isn't it? The ability to do that over a vast area. So you could be talking about an area the size of a state, as in a US state, or you could be talking about a country the size of Ireland. It's not just,
right.
It's not just, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not just theoretically possible. It seems that guys like Gordon, and you don't give yourself enough of a pat on the back either, to be honest. Your work, you guys have proved that this is not theoretically possible. It's absolutely possible, right?
Right, that's correct. And it utilizes essentially what is called a frequency following response, or an FFR. And what this is where the brain of human beings will lock on to an external signal and begin to mirror it, begin to follow it. Hence, frequency following response. And what that does is alter brain chemistry in kind of the sort of grossest way. It can just adjust or alter an emotional state, as an example, from, say, lethargic and passive to highly active and agitated, almost like flipping on and off a light switch. The ability to do this in a directed way on a large scale with HAARP is one thing. The other is to utilize any electromagnetic carrier, which includes television, radio, the internet, the power grid. Any of these things can be modulated in such a way as, again, to couple or connect to the human body and then drive physiological responses to those external signals. Just think about it as if you're a radio receiver, and a radio receiver, when a transmitter sends a signal out, the receiver is in resonance or harmony with that signal, and you hear a nice, clear signal like our voices over the radio. The same is true with every cell, every element, every molecule, every body organ, including the brain within the human body. So if you know enough to sort of tune the human radio, if you will, by analogy, you can affect any physiological process. And this isn't theoretical anymore. This is science fact. It's
a fact. We give off electromagnetic radiation, the brain. And what you've been writing about and speaking about all over the world for years is that it was possible a long time ago for them to be able to tune into that and to direct a signal or other energy waves at that. I mean, it's just as simple as that, Nick. And the reason why I'm labouring this point, and I know you're probably bored of talking about the same things over again, I'm labouring this point because we speak on commercial radio. This is not conspiracy radio. So there are people listening to this and they'll go, oh, that Nick sounds nice. He sounds very well read, but this is crazy crap. I can't be buying this. How can they be interfering with our brains? So that's why I'm labouring that point. And it's so important that a guy like you explains how they can do it, how our brain is wired in a way that enables them to do what they do, right?
Right, and you've read my work, Richie, so you know that everything is very well footnoted, which is kind of the hallmark of what we've done. Is everything we're talking about is footnoted, not with some clandestine conversation, a phone booth, but with real science literature and references, and out of the mainstream media as well. And what I can say is, when you start to look at where the state of the technology has gone in the last 50 years, which we carefully do that, this is, in fact, I believe, the most important technology of the 21st century, not just in terms of the nefarious applications, but also the possibilities as we gain a greater understanding of what we can do and the flexibility of the brain. As an example, with ADHD and attention deficit disorder children or hyperactive children, something called neurobiofeedback or brain biofeedback is now being used, where we actually can teach children without psychoactive drugs how to control their brain activity so they can get into those ideal states of learning, which is something that is normally difficult even for people that aren't so disabled. But these are things that we can do. These are things that we can learn for even enhancing our human performance as normally functioning, normally thinking individuals, which is what got me most excited about the technologies going back to the 1980s in the first place.
Brilliant. Earthpulse.com is where you'll find out more about Nick. Dr. Nick Begich on the line, and that's where you'll find his books as well. Now, I want you to talk in a second about moving away from HAARP and to the sorts of technologies that we're hearing about through leaks and through journalism and how they can do things now. Before we do that, though, you blew my mind years ago when you talked to me about something I didn't know at that time, and that was the mass surrendering of Iraqi soldiers at the end of Gulf War One. I think it was Project Solo, I think it was, Nick. Talk to us again about that. Some of our listeners won't know about that. It's historically accurate and it's amazing. Talk to us about that, yeah.
Right. This was where we actually, we were intercepting radio broadcasts. Project Solo is it was a C-130 aircraft, a big aircraft packed full of electronics. And the objective was to capture the signals of the radio broadcast going into the region, which were broadcasting the Muslim music and prayers that everybody was tuned into on our opposition side. And then what we did is we piggybacked a signal. We put a signal on that by pulse modulating that broadcast in such a way that it gave the listeners this sense of fear or just unbelievable anxiety. And what we saw was the fourth largest army in the world at the time giving up like kids on their first fire drill at school. And when we saw that, it was kind of without explanation. People just said, wow, they're just surrendering en masse to just a handful of people from time to time in these big mass surrenderings. What the public didn't know, and what Scottish media later actually released, was that this project was in play, that we had created that sense of anxiety, that sense of fear in the adversary, which caused them to surrender en masse. So something as simple as this is what I'm speaking about. And you can utilize, in that case, a radio broadcast going into the area.
Brilliant. And I specifically want people listening to this for the first time to keep this in mind and cross-reference what you're hearing from Nick with your own research using any search engine you want. All of this is absolute historical fact. So, Nick, we did, I suppose, get hung up with HARP. Things have moved on. What have you been, since we've last had you were last on exactly 2 years ago, just over 2.5 years ago, in fact. I can't believe it's been that long. Since then, I've been following what you've been doing. I check out what's going on with Earth Pulse regularly, and we share stuff on our Facebook and our social media. What's been going on with the people who developed these, let's call them weapons? I know you talk as well, because you're an academic, you're very fair. You talk about, the possibility for doing good and all of that. But let's call them weapons just for the moment. What's going on with these people? What are the latest developments in technology that they're putting this signal broadcasting type thing? What are they doing now?
Right. The biggest things are what the Air Force, the electromagnetic directorate of the Air Force calls controlled effects. And they started talking openly about this in about 2004. And the idea was to override brain function and do even such things as create synthetic memory. So there were two contracts let back in 2013 to the University of California for what we would call in the vernacular electronic telepathy. The idea of monitoring someone's brain activity from a distance and then running those patterns through computer analogs that could then determine what exactly a person was thinking. Conversely, taking very complex signals and then sending those signals into somebody so that they could actually perceive a memory set or perceive a set of actions as if they were their own. Now, this is the direction in which our military is going for two purposes. One is, they say, for communication with our own troops, and two is for disabling or degrading adversarial troops by being able to override essentially the operator, the human being themselves. In other words, forget about bombs, bullets, and blowing things up. If you can affect the operator in such a way, you can literally shut down warfare. And this is the direction in which it is headed, but not just in warfare. The idea of utilizing these technologies in the civilian sector, this is where I have deep concerns, because the constraint of government is not such that they will constrain themselves in this regard. Whether they're in democracies, democratic republics, or other forms of government, the temptation to use these technologies historically has been too great, and the abuses have been recorded in the record going back now over 50 years, both in the West and in the former Eastern European countries.
Nick, do you suspect, and you're putting your speculation hat on here, but do you suspect that these technologies have been used on unwitting civilians by way of testing them out in experimentation?
Absolutely, and it's not a matter of speculation. Secretary of Energy O'Leary during the Clinton administration, while she was seated in that position, acknowledged over 500,000 Americans, just Americans alone, had been victims of human experiments ranging from the things we're talking about today to a number of other technologies that were tested. 500,000 Americans over a 40-year period, according to Secretary of Energy O'Leary. And more importantly, currently on my website, you'll see what was approved in 2006, I believe it was, the Air Force Protocol on Human Experiments, which still goes on for mind control activities, which they use those words within their own protocols, and it tells you how those programs are currently approved, at least within the Navy, at the undersecretary level. The fact is, these projects continue on. Unwitting victims are the only way you can really test these things in the field, and I would suggest that a lot of that testing happens overseas, outside of the boundaries of the United States, where the lawyers have said the Constitution does not travel, which is why the U.S. has gotten away with torture, kidnapping, extortion, and a number of other felonious acts around the world when they travel outside the boundaries of the U.S., which personally, as an American, is an affront to me and every other citizen of this country when our government thinks the Constitution is laid at the doorstep like kids going out for the evening from your home. This is fundamentally wrong, and it's what is wrong with my country right now.
Well said, Nick. And by the way, just to remind you folks, Nick's website is earthpulse.com. Nick, this is pure speculation. We know, what I'm going to say now is not speculation. We know that the so-called Islamic State was basically created and funded by the intelligence agencies of our countries. So I wonder, the atrocities committed by these Wahhabi jihadists are genuine atrocities. They are terrible. They are despicable. They are heinous. Some of the videos that have come out, I've never seen anything like them. I never thought I would ever see anything like them as long as I lived. I wonder, Nick, could some of these jihadis, could they have been subjected to some of this technology to make them, this isn't very scientific, but to make them batshit crazy, basically, and to do some of these things that even the worst human beings, collectively, you couldn't imagine they would do. What do you think, Nick? Am I way off the mark here, or is it possible?
It certainly is possible. The question is, did they do it? And the technology is certainly there to affect this kind of activity, particularly with people that are predisposed to violence. So the answer is, yes, it is possible. The deeper answer is, did they do it? Time will tell. Maybe we'll see a whistleblower come out of the woodwork on this kind of thing, and we'll get that type of public acknowledgement. My hope is that as we move forward into this century, that this issue moves into the forefront of public debate. This is what will drive us in the wrong direction. Utilizing these techniques in combination with big data will change the way in which the world functions, and it will not be in favor of the average human being. The elites are worried. They are fearful. My family's been in politics at the federal level in my country for 3 generations. I can tell you, people are fearful within the elites, within organized government, because people are waking up, we are being heard, and we are asking for the kinds of reforms that return our governments back to us. This is where the 21st century needs to shift. The ability of controlling human behavior is what the elite's tools in their toolbox will be unleashed on us unless we can shut this down.
Brilliant stuff. And your dad was the U.S. representative, wasn't he? He was a Democrat.
Yes, he was. And my younger brother, Mark, was a United States Senator until recently. My brother, Tom, is currently serving in our state Senate here in Alaska. My family has been involved. We have seen it from the inside out. Every government on this planet is in need of a bit of a shaking, a bit of an awakening. Hopefully, in a less violent way than what we've seen in some parts of the world. And I'm hopeful for that, because I really believe that the opportunities to make change and the revolution that's coming, because as we look at these very technologies designed to potentially enslave us, they are the very same underlying capacities that, in fact, can free us. The biggest fear the military has is what are called anomalous human potentials. The mind control experiments of the U.S. government yielded one very valuable piece of information. Each of us has within us a unique capability as created human beings where the same potential that is synthesized by man in mind control technologies and the ability of human beings to do tremendous things with mental processes is being shown in advanced physics labs around the world, in biophysics labs around the world. We are more than we think, and the greatest threat to the elites is an awakened possibility free of fear. Because, in fact, fear and worry inhibit your ability to reach the higher states of consciousness, the very thing we need in the planet today. You have to shake the fear. If you look at an EEG of the brain in fear and worry and anxiety, you'll get incoherent brain patterns, not those associated with higher ordered thinking. We have to find a way to find the calm in the storm in order to change this storm into the sunny day of the 21st century every one of us deserve.
Brilliant, Nick. We've got about 10 more minutes left on this. Thanks for staying with us. Dr. Nick Begich on the line from Alaska. Go to earthpulse.com. Doesn't get any more serious than this, folks. And I'm not over selling this. This is serious stuff. It really is. Nick, you would have expected, and we've had plenty of tweets about Wi-Fi. We're being sold Wi-Fi. There are Wi-Fi towers everywhere. We are being sold on, well, in fact, we're not being given a choice. Our energy companies are saying we're going to put smart meters into your homes, whether you like it or not. Smart technology, smart Wi-Fi. Now, Dr. Barry Trower, former weapons researcher for the Navy, whom you know, of course, has been on this program before. Barry is certain that part of the attack on our consciousness, on our minds, is through Wi-Fi towers and Wi-Fi technology. What do you think of it?
Absolutely possible. In fact, it allows you to dial it in very specifically on an individualized basis. And this is what's also important to overlap on this big data, because this is the most subtle form of mind control, if you will. The ability to take data and manipulate the individual into making specific decisions. In the case of Brexit and in the case of Trump, a specific type of data was utilized. In fact, it was developed there at Cambridge. And what they're able to do is look at a person's hits on the internet. With as few as 5,000 individual hits, you can determine what a person is like, as well as someone who lived with them for 20 years, and you can predict what that person will do better than they themselves can. You lay that kind of manipulation on top of being able to dial down on an individualized basis, and then you have a huge shift in what is possible. And it will defy every poll number you've ever seen, just like we saw in these two major events, because people can then determine a personality, determine a subpersonality under that, and then direct specific messaging that will influence those people in the most effective way. And this is what happened in our elections and in yours. It's something to pay attention to in the future, because there may be 99 issues the politician knows you don't agree with, and there's one that you do agree with, and that is the only one that they're going to dial in into your domain, if you will. And this is important because the freedom that we once enjoyed at our doorstep now is the freedom that we don't enjoy at our digital doorstep, where more data on us is captured and retained and used to manipulate us than ever in the history of humankind, and it is happening on an ever-increasing basis.
And it is, and there are voices like yours out there and others, but it goes on. Sadly, Nick, when we do programs like this, you and I know that you'll go away and you'll do another interview tomorrow, you'll give a talk somewhere, and you soldier on, no pun intended, but it's difficult to get people, our neighbours, sometimes our close friends who are locked into, you know, the go to work, come home, save in the bank, try and buy a nice house, raise a family mentality. And they hear these things being discussed and they think, no, this can't be true, this can't be true. A number of people have asked me to put to you again, and I will, in the interest of, you know, democracy, because we're a democratic program, but you won't be able to speculate on these individual cases. But a number of people are convinced, Nick, that while men and sometimes women do take guns into schools and into theatres, there's no doubt they do, there are people with problems who will do things like that and will kill people for no good reason. At times, we seem to see a so-called perpetrator who seems to be completely bewildered and confused after the event. So our listeners are tweeting, people being controlled or programmed to go and do something to serve another agenda, and that person is in their own way just as much a victim as the person who really pulled the trigger. Sometimes it's them pulling the trigger. You can't speculate, of course, on individual cases, but we had a case here last summer with a young man who was supposed to have, a middle-aged man who was supposed to have shot an MP, a member of Parliament, Joe Cox. It made no sense whatsoever. Number of listeners saying, what about that? I suppose, Nick, you can only say it's possible, right?
It is not only possible, but there was a gentleman by the name of Estabrooks who back in the 1920s worked in the hypnotherapy labs of Harvard University. And by the 1930s, he was speculating on creating what you just described as sort of the Manchurian candidate, this sort of sleeper agent that could be sent in to do real damage. In fact, he was able to take about 1 in 5 people and put them into such a deep hypnotic state that over 10 months he could actually train them to be exactly that super spy. Now, his work was classified by the 1940s, but he continued to publish into the 1960s. If you look up Estabrooks, you'll find out that he was involved in the CIA experiments with LSD and a number of other things, and actually claimed in the latter part of his life to have created exactly those kinds of super spies for a security agency. So the reality is, yes, we can, and we've had that capability going back to at least the 1960s, according to the work of Estabrooks. And I'm sure that work has not stopped, but only increased.
Increased.
The ideal way to perpetrate the perfect crime.
Nick, a listener has asked me to put to you, what are your thoughts about the Defence Advanced Research Projects Agency, otherwise known as DARPA, and the way executives have jumped between DARPA and Google and DARPA? What do you think of DARPA?
DARPA is, in fact, one of the lead agencies dealing with the technologies we're discussing today. And the overlap with Google, it makes perfect sense to me if you had the objectives of a controlled and directed society in mind. And if you want to look, again, you can see a lot of declassified DARPA materials are posted for free on our website at earthpulse.com. So check it out. Earthpulse.com has a lot of data on this, hundreds of pages. It's free data. Review it, circulate it, get it to other elected officials that can make a difference, and let's not give up on the world just yet. There's a new evolution, a new revolution, and it's going to come from an awakening population. And we're going to see it all through Europe as the elections continue going into the spring and into the fall.
You do. Just finally, Nick, before we do run out of time, we've only got about 90 seconds left. That's a terrific way to end it. You see the people of the United Kingdom railing against the European Union, even the people who voted for Trump. Whatever people think of Trump, love him or hate him, I don't particularly like any of these people. But whether the people were right or wrong, it was a primal scream against the establishment. Do you see that as evidence that there is an absolute awakening to this, to what's going on, and people are more inclined to be open-minded, again, no pun intended, to what you're saying and others are saying about this type of thing?
I believe so. In fact, I think even more so in Europe, where the plague of political correctness has sucked the life out of decent debate. And when people go in the voting booth in the Netherlands and in France and in Germany and throughout Europe, they're going to pull that lever, and that lever is going to be pulled against the established order that have robbed us all of our liberty. And I don't care where I've been on the planet in the last 20 years, we all have the same concerns, we all have the same issues, and it's a corrupt government with a bunch of nice names to make us feel good. But the reality is nobody is feeling good right now, and it is time for that political change. So I'm encouraged by what I've seen in Great Britain. And granted, Trump, I would have much rather seen a more eloquent, a more polite leader, but it's a statement. Donald Trump was the bomb America needed to go off to bring people back to the table of public debate so we might be able to reclaim our governments in the next couple of years. And if that's what it took to trigger it, so much for it. And let's see if we can see a real revolution and a real evolution in the way we behave as human beings.
I tell you what, Nick, I can't believe it was 2.5 years since we last spoke. Fabulous to speak with you again. Folks, go to earthpulse.com. That's where Nick's books are. That's where all of this material is he just spoke about there. Nick, it was a pleasure. Let's not leave it as long before you come back again. Thank you.
Looking forward to it. Thank you so much.
Fantastic stuff. Dr. Nick Begich on the line to us there from his home in Alaska.